The wood in my makeshift stove was running low. Outside, the wind howled through the yellow pines of Iowa's wilderness, carrying sheets of snow that had been falling steadily since noon. Now, I'd built this shelter back in October, half timber frame, half earthen walls, and thank God I had. The temperature had plummeted to -20, and without this snug den, I'd be dead by morning. I've lived off the grid in Yellow River State Forest for 3 years now. Built myself a life here, away from the noise and chaos of civilization. Most folks think I'm crazy, trading a warm house for this. But there's peace in these hills, or at least there was until tonight. Living off-grid means you never stop working. Every drop of water has to be hauled from the creek and boiled. Learned that lesson the hard way my first month here when Giardia had me praying for death. I've got my system down now. 2 large pots always on the stove, one boiling while the other cools. Can't risk running out of clean water when a blizzard hits. The mice are constant companions though, unwanted as they may be. I've scattered flat rocks around the shelter's perimeter, propped up with sticks and baited with peanut butter. The snap of those stone traps in the night has become as familiar as an old friend's voice. Better than having the little bastards chewing through my grain stores, or worse, my carefully dried meat. My daddy taught me to smoke meat when I was just a kid, but out here I perfected the art. Got a smokehouse built into the hillside where venison and rabbit hang like leather curtains. The key is keeping the fire low and slow, feeding it with green hickory when you can get it. Winter's when you need those proteins the most. I've got my routines down to a science now. Every morning I check the perimeter, I look for tracks, make sure nothing's disturbed my cache spots. I've got food and supplies buried in 5 different locations, marked by natural features only I would recognize. A lightning-struck pine here, a peculiar boulder formation there. You can't risk losing everything if a bear finds one stash. The shelter itself took me weeks to get right. Had to dig into the hillside, shore up the walls with pine logs, pack the gaps with mud and moss. The roof's half sod, half timber, sloped just enough to shed snow, but not too steep that the grass slides off in the summer. Inside, I've got my bed raised 18 inches off the ground. You lose too much heat sleeping any lower. And the stove's positioned so its pipe heats the whole space before venting out. Every inch planned, every detail considered. Even my clothes are a system, layer upon layer, each with its purpose. Cotton kills out here. It soaks up sweat and it freezes. Wool and fur, see, that's what keeps you alive. I've got a collection of rabbit pelts that would make a trapper jealous. Took me all summer to cure them properly, but now they line my boots and mittens, keeping frostbite at bay. The first signs something was wrong came around dusk. The chickadees and nuthatches that usually visit my feeder went silent. Even the winter wrens, those hardy little souls that stick around through January, disappeared. The forest felt different, heavier somehow, like the air itself was holding its breath. I was stoking the fire when I first heard it, a sound that didn't belong in these woods, something between a whale song and the screech of metal on metal. It echoed through the trees, setting my teeth on edge. 20 years in these forests. Hell, I'd never heard anything like it. My Winchester was already loaded. Living out here, you learn to stay prepared. I grabbed it and my flashlight, then peered through the single window I'd built into the western wall. The snow was falling so thick I could barely see the oak tree 30 yards out. That's when the tracks appeared. They materialized in the fresh snow, one after another, as if something invisible was walking toward my shelter. Each print was massive, bigger than a bear's, with 6 toes splayed out like a star. The steps were deliberate, methodical. Whatever was making them knew exactly where it was going. My hands weren't shaking when I raised the rifle. I faced down black bears and mountain lions, but something about those tracks appearing out of nowhere, getting closer and closer to my door. Creatures screamed again, closer this time, close enough that the sound rattled the mason jars on my shelves. I fired at where I thought it should be, based on the tracks, and the muzzle flash lit up the night. But there was nothing there, just more tracks still coming. I fired again and again, 5 shots in total, each one aimed perfectly at where any normal creature would have been. But there was nothing to hit, just that invisible force leaving its star-shaped prints in the virgin snow. The thing circled my shelter for hours. Sometimes it would scratch at the walls, long, slow drags that sent shivers throughout me. The earthen walls, normally solid as stone, seemed paper-thin, and each time it passed the window, the temperature would drop another 10 degrees. Frost formed on the inside of the glass, spreading in patterns that looked disturbingly like faces. I kept the fire going, but the cold that thing brought wasn't natural. It seeped into my bones, made my teeth chatter so hard that I thought they'd crack. The shadows in the corners of my shelter seemed to writhe and dance, and more than once I swore I saw something moving in them, something tall and spindly with too many joints. Around 3 a.m, it tried to get in through the chimney. The fire went out instantly, plunging me into darkness. Something large blocked out the stars above, and the smell like a rotting meat and wet fur filled the shelter. I heard it breathing wet, raspy breaths that seemed to come from multiple throats at once. I fired my last shot straight up the chimney. The sound was deafening in the confined space, but it worked. The thing retreated, its screech fading into the forest. The fire sputtered back to life on its own, as if it had never gone out. When dawn finally came, I stepped outside. The tracks were still there, circling my shelter hundreds of times. But they stopped abruptly at the tree line, as if whatever made them had simply vanished. The snow around each print had turned black, and when I touched it, it was warm. Now, I've been in these woods a very long time. Thought I knew every creature that called this forest home, but last night showed me how little I actually know. The locals, the Meskwaki people, they have stories about winter spirits that hunt in the deep snow. I used to think they were just tales to scare children. Later, I found something in my grandfather's journals. He was a logger in these parts back in the 1950s, and he wrote about the Meskwaki elders warning them not to cut certain trees. Sacred trees, they said, marked with symbols I now recognized as looking eerily similar to those star-shaped tracks. The loggers ignored the warnings, of course. 12 men disappeared that winter. The elders spoke of ancient beings that slumbered beneath the earth, guardians of places where the boundary between worlds had worn thin. They said these creatures didn't just hunt. They collected, gathered those who dared to live too close to their domains, especially those who showed skill at surviving the brutal winters, as if they were collecting specimens, studying how humans adapted to the cold and the dark. But my mind keeps going back to something I found while digging the foundation for my shelter. Deep in the earth, I uncovered strange markings carved into a stone shelf, geometric patterns that seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them. I should have known then. should have recognized the warning for what it was. This isn't just my shelter. I built it right on top of one of their ancient gateways, and now I understand why it's been watching me all these months, learning my routines, studying my survival techniques. It's not just hunting me, it's evaluating me, testing my worthiness. The Meskwaki stories say that these beings take the strongest survivors back to their realm, adding their knowledge and adaptability to their own, like a cosmic library of survival skills collected over millennia. The creature doesn't want to kill me. It wants to preserve me, add me to its collection. And the worst part is, deep in my bones, I'm starting to feel a terrible attraction to that doorway in the shadows. Part of me wants to know what's on the other side. Part of me wants to understand. But maybe that's how it really gets you in the end. Not through fear, but through curiosity, through that deep human need to know what lies beyond the boundaries of our world. And now I know better. The snow's starting to fall again, heavy like last night. I've got my rifle reloaded, but I know that the bullets won't help if it comes back. All I can do is keep the fire burning and pray that whatever it is, it found what it was looking for last night. Then sometimes when I look out my window at the darkening forest, I see the fresh tracks beginning to form in the snow again, and I know deep in my bones that it's not done with me yet. People don't understand what true darkness is until they spent a winter night in these woods. Out here when the sun sets, it's like being swallowed whole. The darkness has a weight to it, substance, especially on moonless nights when the clouds choke out even the stars. Kind of darkness that makes you question if light ever existed at all. The wind just doesn't blow here either. It hunts. See, it finds every crack, every seam in your clothing, every gap in your shelter's walls. Carries ice crystals that sting like needles against any exposed skin. And sometimes, in the deepest part of the night, it sounds like voices calling my name. I know it's just the wind catching in the hollow trees and frozen branches, but knowing doesn't make it any less haunting. I mean, sure, there's times when the solitude weighs heavy on my soul. Nights when I catch myself talking to the fire just to hear a human voice. Days when the only conversation I have is with the ravens that visit my compost pile. My family thinks that I'm running from something, but they've got it backwards. I ran toward something. Toward this pure, primal silence that strips away everything artificial about modern life. Or at least, that's what I used to think, but now? Well, now I'm not so sure. Last night, just before it attacked my chimney, my flashlight caught something I've been trying to forget. I was scanning the tree line, following those impossible tracks, when the beam caught a reflection. Like catching a cat's eye in the dark. Except these eyes were the size of dinner plates. And there were around 6 of them. They were arranged in clusters, some blinking vertically instead of horizontally. All of them sickly yellow-green that seemed to glow from within. But it was what I saw below those eyes that haunts me the most. Just for a split second, the light illuminated what looked like pale, almost translucent flesh, stretched too tight over a skeletal frame that couldn't have been less than 12 feet tall. The creature was bent at a strange angle, its joints twisted backwards, its limbs too long and too numerous, and where its face should have been, there was just a mass of writhing tendrils, like pale worms or roots, all reaching toward me with a purpose. I dropped the flashlight, and by the time I picked it up, the thing was gone, or rather, invisible again. But now I know what's out there. Now I know what makes those star-shaped prints? What scratches at my walls in the dead of night? The wind's picking up again, and the ice crystals hitting my window sound different tonight, more like claws tapping on glass. Those tracks are appearing again in the fresh snow, but they're not circling this time. They're coming straight for my door. And this time, I swear I could see the faint impressions in the air where that thing stands, like heat waves rising from a summer pavement. Only these distortions are in the shape of something that shouldn't exist in this or any other world. I've got 3 bullets left for my rifle. Fire's burning low, and those eyes, those horrible, strange, clustered eyes, are gleaming just beyond my window. My hands are trembling so badly now I could barely write. Temperature in my shelter has dropped so low that my breath comes out in thick clouds, and the ink in my pen keeps trying to freeze, and I keep ripping this piece of paper with it. I need to record this, need to leave some record of what's happening, in case anybody finds it. The thing outside is just not watching anymore. It's learning. I can feel it probing my mind, testing my defenses. And every time I close my eyes, even just to blink, I see flashes of places I've never been, vast, dark spaces filled with things that slither and crawl. And those eyes, those damned clustered eyes watching from every angle. The scratching at my walls has changed its rhythm. It's tapping out a pattern now. God help me, I think I'm starting to understand it. I think it's trying to speak to me, and the more I listen to it, the more I realize it's mimicking the way I talk to myself when I'm alone. It's been watching me for months, hasn't it? Learning my habits, my patterns, my moments of weakness. The shadows in my shelter are strange somehow. They're stretching in directions that don't match my lantern's light, reaching toward me with finger-like tendrils. And the shadows, they're moving against the light. My father's old hunting compass is spinning in circles, and the metal has turned black where I had touched it. And I just heard something that sounds like my mother's voice calling from outside. But my mama died 12 years ago. The creature is scratching words into my window now, writing backwards so I could read them from inside. Words in my own handwriting, words from the journal entries I wrote months ago, private thoughts I never shared with anyone. My radio, which hasn't worked since that blizzard last month, just crackled to life. Through the static, I hear something whispering my name, but not my common name, my full name, the one on my birth certificate, that one I haven't used in over 20 years. The fire is dying again, but it's different. The flames are burning black. The shadows they cast on the wall look like people. Everyone I've ever known, dancing in silhouette. Their forms twisted and distorted. Then they're all facing me, pointing at me, their mouths open in silent screams. And that smell is back, the rotting meat and wet fur. But now there's something else mixed in. Something that smells like my childhood home, like my mother's cooking, like summer evenings in our backyard. How can it know these things? The walls are breathing, actually breathing, expanding and contracting like lungs. And in the corner where the shadows are the deepest, something is emerging. Something that looks like a door, but it opens into a place that isn't anywhere on Earth. I could hear voices coming from it. Beautiful, terrible voices that make my nose bleed and my teeth ache. My rifle? Well, the metal is hot to the touch now, almost glowing, and the bullets have turned to glass, filled with something that writhes and pulses. And I think this is it. The thing outside, it's not just trying to get in anymore. It's trying to turn my shelter, my sanctuary, into itself. And it's succeeding. The walls, the floor, even the air, it's all becoming part of that thing. Or maybe it always was. If anyone finds this, don't try looking for me. Don't try to understand what happened here. You just need to leave. Run before you start seeing the tracks. Run before you hear your dead mother's voice howling in the wind. And run before you realize, like I finally have, that it's not just one creature out there in the dark. We're in its world now. We always were. We just didn't have the eyes to see it.